stretched out the earth above the waters. There used to be a lot more water under the crust of the earth. That's probably what came shooting to the surface during the flood and caused everybody to drown. Most of the water for the flood did not come from the 40 days of rain. It came from the water that had been stored underneath. Subterranean water chambers. Of course, there's still a lot of water down there. Next thing to keep in mind, there might be two ways to look at things. How fast was that calf going? If you remember video part number 4 about the calf puller. So we're going to give you the Hovind theory tonight. What happened anyway? What caused all this to, what caused the worldwide flood? I made a conscious decision years ago. I decided I'm going to believe the Bible until somebody can prove that it's wrong. I had some friends I went to school with. They decided they are not going to believe the Bible until it is proven right. Maybe you heard about the atheist. He came to the preacher one day. He said, "Preacher, I don't believe anything in the Bible." He said, "You don't?" He said, "I don't believe nothing except you got to prove it to me scientifically. If you can't prove it with science, I won't believe it." He said, "Preacher, if you can prove one verse scientifically, I will believe it." The preacher said, "Well, okay." He grabbed the atheist around the neck and grabbed his nose and began twisting his nose back and forth. Pretty soon the blood was pouring down the guy's face. He said, "Man, what are you doing?" He said, "I was proving the Bible. It says the wringing of the nose bringeth forth blood." Proverbs chapter 30. Anyway, I don't recommend you do that, but it does say that, by the way. What I'm going to do for the Hovind theory tonight, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you, and then when we're all done, we'll leave. So first I'll tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you, and then we'll be done. That's supposed to be a good teaching technique, they say. A quick review. Let's go through it very quickly. 8 points I want to get across tonight about the Hovind theory. Number 1, Noah and his family got safely into the ark. Number 2, a 300 below zero ice meteor came flying through the solar system, and it fragmented and cratered the planets and caused the rings around other planets. As this ice meteor approached the earth, it shattered because of the inverse square law and the speed building up. And most of the shattered snow fragments and ice fragments were sucked in around the North and South Pole because of the strong magnetic field of the earth. Number 4, the sudden dump of ice on the earth caused the earth's crust to crack, which released the fountains of the deep. It caused the earth to wobble around for a few thousand years, maybe 1,000 years afterwards, and it caused the pre-flood canopy to collapse, and it completely flooded the world. So the water came from 3 sources: underneath, inside the crust, came from rain, and came from melting ice. That's part of the Hovind theory. Number 5, during the first few months of the flood, the dead animals would settle out in great swirling piles. As the water swirled around, you would get fossil graveyards. And the plants would pack and get buried into seams, and they would become coal later on, and you'd get fossil graveyards and coal formed by the flood. Number 5, during the last few months of the flood, the earth, which had been cracked up now, the plates were unstable. These plates began shifting around and tilting, maybe plates as big as Texas, maybe plates as big as America. They would shift and tilt. As one place goes up and another place goes down, the water's going to rush off, carving Grand Canyon in a few hours. Water rushing off through soft sediments. Number 7, over the next few hundred years, the ice caps would slowly melt back. That would raise the ocean levels, make the oceans deeper, colder, and wider, which would divide the earth up into the continents we see today. And number 8, the earth today still shows the effects of that horrible flood that destroyed the world. So that's the Hovind theory. Let's go back and hit a few high points now. Noah and his family got safely into the ark. Genesis 7, and the Lord said unto Noah, "Come thou." But let me stop right there. God did not say to Noah, "Go into the ark," did he? He said, "Come into the ark." Now tell me, where does God have to be in order to say that? In the ark. That'll preach, brother. There's a whole lot of comes in the Bible. "Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, I'll give you rest. Come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord." Isaiah 1:18. I think you ought to go through the Bible and study all the comes, and then you ought to come to Jesus if you're not saved. He loves you. He wants you saved. He wants to put His yoke on you. It's easy. It's wonderful serving God in this life. Just come to Him with your problems. He'll take care of them for you. Anyway, the Lord said, "Come into the ark." And so all the critters went in, 2 of each kind and 7 of some. And then the Lord shut the door. That's a good eternal security verse, by the way. When God shuts the door, it won't leak. People say, Brother Hovind, you believe you're eternally secure? Yeah. I got born into God's family, and He is stuck with me. Now, some of God's children, He takes them home and crowns them. Other children, He crowns them and takes them home. But if you're saved, you are eternally secure. You are going to heaven. Okay. So what happened is 300 below zero ice meteor came flying through the solar system, and it began to break apart as it came through the solar system. Fragments began to hit the planets. Chunks of ice would hit Mars. Now, Mars gets pretty hot in the daytime, and so the ice would melt, and there would be floods all over Mars, but then it's going to vaporize and disappear. It would drift off, lost in space. So the flooding happened on Mars, causing these giant canyons, probably at about the same time as the flood, as this catastrophe affected the whole solar system. As the fragments of meteor came flying through, some of them would get trapped in the spin of the planets in the gravitational pull, and they would become the rings around the planets. At least 4 planets have ice rings around them. Where did this material come from? The fragments on the planets are rings made of rock and ice. Interesting. Could have happened at the time of the flood. Number 3, as this meteor approached the Earth, or pieces of it approached the Earth, or maybe we just went through the tail, through a debris tail, I don't know. Regardless, though, I believe a whole lot of ice was sucked into the North and South Pole because of the Earth's strong magnetic field. Super cold ice is slightly magnetic, and it is easily statically charged. So those are 2 factors that might have sucked it into the North and South Pole, causing it to be dumped on the pole. As the meteor came flying in through space, it broke apart out in space, and the fragments would generally go to the pole. That would cause the Earth to wobble for a few thousand years. You have a spinning object, and you're going to dump a bunch of weight on there. If it's slightly off-center, it's going to create the wobble effect. As this ice meteor came flying in, it broke apart and sucked around the poles and dumped on the North and South Pole. Now, when you get 300 below zero ice, you're going to freeze the mammoths standing up. This sudden dump of ice caused the crust of the Earth to crack, and the fountains of the great deep were broken open. Water came shooting up to the surface, and the Earth was totally covered by water. Up near the North Pole, they find frozen bobcats, frozen camels. Camels don't live near the North Pole, folks. All sorts of frozen animals. It's not just frozen mammoths. Strange things up there are found frozen. And when they drill through the ice, oftentimes under the ice they find coal. Well, coal is made from plants. This map of National Geographic's South Pole here says they had the Dirty Diamond Mine dug here in 1962, which yielded anthracite coal. Well, since coal is made from plants and there are no plants on Antarctica, we have a problem here. How do you get coal in Antarctica? Admiral Byrd said he reported seeing palm trees under the ice when he got down near the South Pole. Well, palm trees don't grow near the South Pole, folks. We have a hard time getting them to grow in Florida because in North Florida, because it's too cold for palm trees. You sure don't get them to grow at the North Pole. They find thousands of dinosaur fossils found 400 miles from the South Pole. Dinosaurs are found. Dinosaurs live on plants, most of them, and there are no animals down there that have like a dinosaur, no reptiles, that's for sure. Thousands of well-preserved leaves found in Antarctica, this article says. 250 miles from the South Pole. Thousands and thousands of leaves that still retain their original cellular structure. They're pressed, squeezed into layers. There's a scientist who had a theory that he thinks the Earth is still being hit by ice meteors. And by the way, it was vindicated several years ago when they noticed there are chunks of ice as big as houses hitting the Earth every day. There are still fragments of ice flying around through space. Now they hit the atmosphere and vaporize and come down in the form of water. But if you look at the Earth, you'll notice it has 2 North Poles. We have a real North Pole and we have a magnetic North Pole. How many have heard of that before? Your compass points to the magnetic North Pole. Now right here in Missouri, they line up pretty good, so you don't have to worry about, adjusting your compass. But if you lived in Alaska, there's quite a difference between real north and magnetic north. And you'd have to allow for that, especially if you're an airplane pilot and it mattered, which way you're going. This ice age appears to be centered around the magnetic North Pole. So here's what I think might have happened. The mammoths are chomping on their tropical flowers. It was a nice day outside. All of a sudden it began to snow. They had never seen snow before. So one of them said, "Herman, this is peculiar weather we're having here. It's snowing." Ooh, that's cold snow. That's 300 below zero Fahrenheit. Or maybe they use Kelvin or Celsius. I'm not sure what mammoths use. But anyway, he said, "That's cold. Let's get out of here." So they began running around, and the snow got deeper and deeper. And pretty soon they got trapped in snow drifts, standing up. And they couldn't even fall down. Have you ever been in snow so deep you could not even fall over? You ever seen that before? You're stuck standing up, you can't even fall down. And as this snow got deeper and deeper, it began pushing out toward the equator, and it would carve out glacial effects. There were chunks of ice as big as Texas sliding across the countryside at 100 miles an hour, scratching out glacial grooves which are found all over the northern and southern latitudes of the earth. These glacial grooves where rocks were slid, sometimes for miles, scratching the rock. And the ice came all the way down to Kansas City, Missouri, and the earth was totally covered by water, some liquid, some solid. But still, water, because that canopy had collapsed. See, when cold air hits regular air, it makes it rain. So the cold spots on the North and South Pole would send out a cold front. You ever open the freezer and see the cold air come flying out, or falling out? That's what probably happened. The cold wave hit the regular air and it rained, collapsing the pre-flood canopy, which completely covered the earth. The Bible says, the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. If you ever get a chance to read the book of Jasher, somebody sent this to me. Brother, it is amazing reading. You ever seen that book of Jasher? It's referred to twice in the Bible, as it says in the book of Jasher. In Jasher chapter 6, it says, on that day the Lord caused the whole earth to shake, and the sun darkened, and the foundations of the world raged, and the whole earth was moved violently, and the lightning flashed, and the thunder roared, and all the foundations of the earth were broken up. Now, it's an extra biblical book. It shouldn't be part of the Bible, but it's very interesting reading from an ancient source about what the flood was like. Okay, next in the Hovind theory, this dump of ice on the North and South Pole would cause the crust to crack. Spreading ice would carve the glacial effects. It would bury the mammoths, and it would cause the earth to wobble, and it would destroy the pre-flood world. The canopy collapsed. Genesis 9, the Bible says all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. It was a worldwide flood. Did you know if you shrank the earth down to the size of a cue ball, the earth would be smoother and rounder than the cue ball? And if you shrank it down to the size of a 12-inch globe, all of the water in the world would not even fill 1 tablespoon at that scale. I mean, the oceans look huge, but folks, compared to the size of the earth, there's just not much water here. 1 tablespoon to a 12-inch globe is what you would have. Now, Mount Everest is interesting. At the top of Mount Everest, it's covered with seashells, clams. I've got one on the table down there. Petrified clams in the closed position. Now, in the first place, I would like to point out, Mount Everest is a little ways from the beach. Secondly, clams do not climb mountains very well. Thirdly, when a clam dies, it opens right away. You can come to Pensacola, go down to see the beach there, and walk along the beach and pick up a whole trainload of seashells. But you're never going to find a closed pear. If it's dead, it'll open right away. The muscle relaxes, and something eats the muscle out. You're lucky to find a matched pear. You never find them closed, unless they're still alive. The only way to get petrified clams in the closed position would be to bury it alive. There are some places where the clams are found petrified in the closed position, and there are layers of them 10 feet thick. Solid petrified clams. Interesting. Genesis 7 says the fountains of the deep were broken up. I think the earth got struck by something, maybe chunks of ice coming in from the North and South Pole, and that caused the earth's crust to crack. And the fountains of the deep went shooting out. And the earth today still has the scars where this happened. The cracks are called the fault lines. As the hot water came shooting out, it would kill all the fish and other things within a certain effective radius. As this water came shooting out along the seams, it's going to erode the sides of the crack and push them away. That's going to let the layer underneath bulge up, making them slide away even faster. So what you would end up with is the bulging effect of the basalt, it's called, lifting up, cracking, explaining the magnetic anomalies, and the surfaces are going to slide backwards. As they slide back, they're going to eventually stop, like pushing a carpet on one end. It's going to wrinkle up at the wall at the other end. And the wrinkled mountains we find all over the world indicate they were compressed from the end, not lifted up from underneath. It was a compression going right to left. Interesting. Why do we have these mountains like that? And this hot water shooting out from inside the earth would kill the diatoms. Diatoms are itty-bitty glass-bodied critters that live in the ocean. They make their body out of glass, silica. When they die, the body falls to the bottom. And then the kids fall to the bottom, and the grandkids and the great-grandkids. They say it takes about 1,000 years to get an inch of diatoms because they are extremely tiny. Under a microscope, they're beautiful, but they're really tiny. When this stuff dries out, they call it diatomaceous earth. Has anybody ever heard of diatomaceous earth before? They use it for all sorts of things. It's used for swimming pool filters, detergents, fertilizers, soundproofing, kitty litter. You know the white rocks you put out for the cat to go potty on? That's diatomaceous earth. Oil dry. When you spill oil on your driveway, drop out diatomaceous earth crystals. It soaks the oil right up. It's used for all sorts of things. Well, the largest diatomaceous earth quarry that I'm aware of is in Southern California. Lompoc, California is right smack on top of the San Andreas Fault. And right there, the diatomaceous earth is 1,500 feet thick in places. I've been to see the quarry, talked to people that worked there, took quite a tour of that place. In 1976, they were digging for diatomaceous earth, just scooping it out with machines. They found the fossil skeleton of a baleen whale. They find billions of fossils in the diatomaceous earth. But this day they found a whale. The whale was standing on end, 80 feet long. Now the layers of rock are tilted with the whale, so really the 80 feet's not the problem, but the 8-foot thickness is the problem of the whale. If it takes 1,000 years to get an inch of diatomaceous earth, don't you think that whale would rot in less than 50 or 60,000 years? Animals that die today in the ocean, they don't fossilize. They get scavenged. They get ripped apart. Something's going to eat them. They dissolve. The only way to get a fossil whale packed in diatomaceous earth, preserved, would be to completely bury him very rapidly. I think what happened, the water came shooting out, hot water, killed all the diatoms within a few hundred miles maybe, and it snowed diatoms to the bottom. It was a very rapid accumulation because of that worldwide flood. When I was out there, one of the foremen there gave me this chunk of diatomaceous earth. It's about maybe 1 foot square, but it contains hundreds of fish fossils in 1 square foot. He said, we find fossils here all the time. He said, one time we were digging on the night shift, and they had all these spotlights set up. He said, we found a 60-foot wingspan pterodactyl. But we didn't stop and tell anybody, because if you tell some university, we got a fossil here, they're going to make you shut down production while they come dig out their fossil, and you're going to lose money. We're here to make money, so we just dug right through it. But they find all sorts of fossils out there. Call them up and ask them. You'll see they always find fossils by the trillions. In Dover, England, they find chalk that is 3 feet thick. I'm sorry, 300 feet thick, solid chalk. You can break up your yard and write on the chalkboard with it. The word Cretia is Latin for chalk, and that's where we get the word Cretaceous age, the chalk age. What happened? Did all the critters decide to go to England to die to make the layer of chalk for us? Or could there have been a catastrophe? Rapid change of ocean temperature. I believe that's what happened. Genesis 7, the Bible says the waters prevailed. I mean, that world was destroyed by the flood. So point number 5 in the Hovind theory, during the first few months of the flood, the dead animals settled out. Moving water is going to make them swirl in little eddies, as they're called, and great piles of dead animals and plants are going to accumulate. In some layers, they're going to make coal seams. Other layers are going to make fossil graveyards. Moving water automatically separates particles based upon their density. You ever seen those things you can buy at the store with 2 layers of glass and different color sand in between? When you flip it over, it makes all these strange patterns. Notice it always makes layers. Interesting. That's what the flood would do. The flood formed all those layers quickly, not millions of years of accumulation. And as these animals swirled around, they would begin to rot, and the head falls off, the tail falls off, the ribs fall off, and you end up with a dinosaur graveyard, fossil bones tangled up, obviously twisted, contorted positions, disarticulated, meaning they're not put together, and there's no teeth marks. He wasn't chewed apart by a scavenger. He rotted and fell apart, probably during the flood. They find concentration of fossils was remarkable, like logs in a log jam. Billions of fossils are found. The evolutionists aren't having a hard time finding fossils. They're having a hard time finding missing links between the different kinds of fossils. That's where the hard time comes in. I was in a debate one time, and this professor said, we've got proof for evolution. We found a fossil over here that's a missing link between this animal and this animal. I said, well, sir, I'd like to point out something. If you find a fossil in the ground, all you know is it died. You don't know if he had any kids, let alone different kids, right? Secondly, I'd like to ask the question, how come that fossil is able to do something that the animals today cannot do? You're claiming this bone in the dirt can produce an animal different than itself. Why don't the animals today ever produce something different than themselves? It's always the long ago and far away it happened, but we don't see it happening today. I think the fossils formed because of this flood. We can go all day on instances of fossils that are found in twisted, contorted positions. In a Belgian coal mine, they found thousands of iguanodon skeletons, dinosaur skeletons. Hundreds of dinosaur track sites, that's the footprints, are found all over the world. Well-preserved track sites. Some places they find more than 1,000 footprints together. In the Karoo Formation in Africa, they found 800,000 million fossils of vertebrate animals, animals with a backbone. 800,000 million. In Axel Island, up near in Canada, they find petrified redwood tree stumps. Well, first place, if you look at the background there are no trees growing on Axel Island. Especially not redwood trees. They require very special climate to grow. Very few places can grow redwood trees. And here they are in Canada, way up near the North Pole. So in the Hovind theory, petrification can take place very rapidly. Animals have to be buried, and they can petrify in less than 100 years. Here's a petrified water wheel. The water kept running over it and turned the wood into stone. Here's a petrified fish giving birth. Petrified as the baby's being born. It doesn't take millions of years to be born. Praise the Lord, right? Here's a petrified cowboy boot with a leg still in it. The boot manufacturer said that boot was probably made about 1950. The cowboy's leg is still in it. Apparently he got his leg shot off or torn off or something happened, and it turned to stone. It's petrified, folks. Here's a petrified hat found in New Zealand. Don't let them tell you it takes millions of years for things to petrify. A little kid in Arizona sent me a petrified crayon that he found. Petrified. In Tennessee, Gainesboro, Tennessee, a man died in 1881. They buried him. 14 years later, his wife died. They were going to bury Grandma. They dug the hole, and water soaked into the hole. So they dug a hole on the other side, and water soaked in. And so they buried Grandma someplace else. Well, the grandkids got worried about Grandpa being buried in this water, and so they had his body taken out of the grave, and they found out his body had completely turned to stone. He had petrified in 14 years, being in running water. Petrified human. Occupants of the coffin had turned to stone, this article says, as a result of continual flow of water, perhaps minerals in it, over such long periods of time. Things don't take millions of years to petrify. It can happen very quickly under the right conditions. You kids are going to be told in school that each of the layers of the earth is a different age, and they're going to tell you that the fossils are sorted based upon how they evolved. Simple at the bottom, complex at the top. First place, they're not sorted that way, and it's silly for creationists to argue that they are because they're not sorted like the textbook says they are. And evolutionists admit it. They say, look, David Ropp, who's a strong believer in evolution, says, I don't know why you guys argue about the sorting, because they're not sorted neatly. But if there is any sorting to the fossils, it's because of the moving water. Water separates these things. See, the way they date the fossils is by which layer they come from, and the way they date the layers is by which fossil they find in the layer. Circular reasoning. We covered that in videotape number 4. Moving water is going to automatically sort things. Now, kids are going to be told that clams evolved first, and so they're going to be put at the bottom of the geologic column. Well, now, kids, I'd like to point out a couple of things. It could be the animals are sorted with clams at the bottom and birds on top because they're sorted based upon their habitat. When a flood starts, clams are already at the bottom. Aren't they? Wouldn't they be likely to be the first ones buried? Wouldn't the birds generally be the last ones buried in a flood because they could fly around till they run out of gas, right? Maybe they're sorted based upon their intelligence. As best anybody can figure out, clams are not too bright. Maybe they're sorted based upon their mobility. Did you know clams cannot run very fast? Maybe they're sorted based upon their body density. Did you know a clam shell is a little heavier than a bird feather? No, don't let them tell you that they're sorted based upon evolution. They're sorted based upon a flood. Genesis 7 says, the high hills under the whole heaven were covered, and the mountains were covered. The earth was completely covered. Hugh Ross and his followers are teaching everybody that it was just a local flood in the days of Noah. Well, I'm sorry, Hugh, if the mountains are covered, it's no longer a local flood. Secondly, I'd like to point out, why on earth would God tell Noah to build a huge boat and fill it full of animals and stay on there for a year if it's just going to be a local flood? Why not tell Noah to move? I can figure that out. I'm sure God could figure it out. And why save any animals if it's just a local flood? There's animals other places of the world. No, it was a worldwide flood. And Hugh Ross, God bless him, I'm sure he's an extremely intelligent man, but some of the things he teaches are just plain heresy. You ought to get the book we have called Creation and Time and see what Hugh Ross really believes. And it's tragic that some major Christians have swallowed into Hugh Ross's teachings and had him on their Christian TV programs and everything else when he does not believe what the Bible says. He might claim he does, but he does not. It was not a local flood, it was a worldwide flood.